Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. So today's chapters are 2 Kings 24 and Luke 10. Now in Luke 10, our setting is really a road. The 72 being sent out into the villages, a man lying on the side of the road left for dead, and Jesus going down the road to Bethany. And in these three scenarios, we see the fact of the mission, that we are called on a mission with Jesus. We see who we to do that mission to. And then in the last little story of Mary and Martha, we see the heart with which we are to do that mission. Now, if I walk a little further down the road here, there's a massive troop of monkeys. They might surprise us as we continue our story. And yeah, it reminds me of this text when Jesus says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. So in other words, you're minding your own business. This thing, the mission of God, proclaiming the gospel, is not easy. And it's fraught with surprises. So let's have a look. First of all, he says, the fields out there, the villages out there, the people out there, they're like a harvest field. And they ripe. They ripe for these people to be brought into the kingdom. And so he's basically saying, I'm sending you into this harvest field. So the question that I ask you is, what harvest field has God put you in? In your school, in your work environment, in the village that you live in, your neighbors. That's your harvest field. And Jesus is telling his disciples, the time is short, man. It's ripe. So how do you go about and get that harvest field? Well, he says, I'm giving you authority to pray for people, to be healed. When you ask God to break in. I remember sitting on a plane once, coming out of Brazil, and this lady next to me was terrified of flying. She was terrified. And just me offering to pray for her opened the way for me to share the gospel with her. Now, he also says, listen, you're going to get rejected. When you let Jesus out, you're going to get rejected. And listen, remember, they rejected me, so they're going to reject you. He said, don't let that stop you. There's far greater things at stake here. And then this is, I think, the culmination of this story of the 72 going out. Remember, he told them what to say, preach the kingdom. In other words, there is another king. It's not you, and it's not, Caesar. There is another king. That's the message we're preaching. Bow down to his lordship. He needs to be Lord of your life. But they come back full of joy, verse 17 says, and they say to him, look, even the demons submit to us. And then Jesus says to them, listen, Satan's fallen. I've destroyed Satan. But there's something far greater at stake, that your names are written in the Lamb's book of life. And then verse 21 says, Jesus, full of joy. As Jesus looking at his disciples as they share their faith, he was full of joy. In John chapter 4, when Jesus looked at the whole Samaritan village that was coming down to him, it said, listen, my food, the thing that sustains me, that makes me strong, is to do the will of the one who sent me. When we do God's will like this, when we go on this journey of faith, sharing our faith, and you say, God, I don't know how to do that. No, listen, you all have a testimony. I have a testimony. What I was like before I was saved, that I got saved, and my life after I saved, that's what your testimony is. And you can weave into that story, you have a new king. And that he calls you and your friends to surrender to him. Anyway, the joy of being on this mission sustained Jesus and will sustain you and me. And then he tells a story. He says, not only should we be doing this, because some religious leader came to him and said, well, who's my neighbor? If I should be loving my neighbor, sharing my faith with my neighbor, who's my neighbor? Jesus tells the story about a guy who was left for dead on the road, and a priest came by, did nothing. A Levite came by, did nothing. Then a Samaritan. In other words, he was of another culture, another economic class, didn't even know him, absolute stranger. He came, loved him, looked after him, put him in, invested in him financially. And Jesus says, now, that's what it's like being an. That's who we do it to. Who do we do it to? The least of these people that are different to us. It's not just our mates. It's not just our mates. That's what that story is about. And then this chapter ends with the story of Mary and Martha. Mary at Jesus' feet, Martha in the kitchen. Now, they've been wired differently, haven't they? Mary is a worshiper. She is, just loves hanging on every word of Jesus, whereas Martha's busy doing a job for Jesus. And Martha was getting grumpy because Mary wasn't acting in the grace that she was acting in. And Jesus said, no, I've wired her this way. Let her do this for me. You do that for me. Let her do this for me. God's given us all unique gifts. The way that we walk down this road, the way that we minister to people, the way that we share the gospel is going to be different depending on what God has given you to do and how He's wired you to do it. And so my encouragement out of this text is that God has called us to join Him, presenting Him, His Lordship and His light to the world around us. Well, just quickly, in 2 Kings 24, Jehoiakim and Jehoiakim, the last two kings before the Babylonian invasion, were wicked kings, and God allows the Babylonians to come and ransack the place, take people off into captivity. Why? Because they chose, when they'd heard about God, they'd heard about His kingship, they'd heard about His rule, they said, listen, we're going to go our way. Now, sadly, friends, when you share the gospel with people and they say, no, thank you, I'll go my own way, they've got Babylon waiting. They've got Nebuchadnezzar waiting. There's a lot at stake. What a joy to be able to partner with Jesus in this great mission, the Missio Dei, as theologians call it.